Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Engine 25 YouTube channel. Engine 25 reviews. It's a little thing I started up to chat with some friends about movies that we're able to see, which is kind of a challenge sometimes these days. But if you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so you know when we post a video. We are also on Spotify now. You can get us in audio form, and we really appreciate you hanging out. So here are our panelists for today. You've seen them both. If you're a regular viewer, you've seen them both before. We have Dr. Dan, who is playing dad duty right now, and to Abby, who's our wonderful special guest. How's it going? Um, how's it going? Yeah, hey, yeah, she's super attentive. I like it.
Yeah,
And of course, Katie, who's been on several episodes. How you doing today?
Hi, I'm good.
Okay. Um, yes, Dan is a PhD film scholar and writer, and Katie is a hopeful PhD and film scholar.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah,
Getting
but
there.
if you've seen some other episodes, you probably know each of them. But how's it been going? What have you been? You been to the theater lately, other than the topic of the show that we'll get to? Dan, you
I've
go first.
yeah, I was saying before we started, I saw the last Duel. I'm lucky. I'm right now. I'm from Georgia. I'm sure your listeners all know where you're from. But I live in Pittsburgh in like Squirrel Hill, which is where Mister Rogers lived. So there's like a nice little like
Nice.
old movie theater like right down the road. And so I've been able to sneak out a couple of times, and I saw The Last Duel. I saw The Card Counter a few weeks ago, Paul Schrader's new film,
Yeah.
which is weird, but that's what you expect from him. And gosh, there was one other big one. I'm blanking on it. Oh, yeah, I think before that it might have been the one we talked about, The Green Knight, or even Nomadland,
Okay.
maybe.
I look back. That was like 3 months ago. I don't know. Work has been crazy,
All
and
right.
COVID got really bad, so it was hard to go see movies. So I kind of took a brief break on the podcast, which may or may not happen again. Um, what have you been watching, Katie?
I've been lapping up my ability to actually go to the theater.
Yes,
and
yes.
I
Atlanta's in
mean,
the green zone. Like they pulled the mask
right.
mandate. Like hospitals are at non or like normal non-pandemic capacity. Like it's
Wow.
not the same in the county where I live, which is a little further north, but Atlanta
Yeah,
City is doing great right now. So that's
that's wonderful.
yeah.
I'm in Western Massachusetts. So we're still dealing with some COVID stuff for
Well,
sure.
it's still a thing around here, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's was
But
much
I'm
worse
glad
3 weeks ago.
I'm glad to have a few movie theaters in the area that I can kind of bop around to depending on who has what and what's playing where. So I got to go see, I actually had to go up to Amherst, which is about 40 minutes away north of me where I'm at. And
Still in Massachusetts.
Yep, yep, still in Massachusetts, and see Last Night in Soho. But before that, I had to go about 40 minutes south to into Connecticut to see The French Dispatch. So I'm kind of bopping around everywhere, but making the
Yeah,
best
I've
of it.
been with AMC Stubs. They do like cheap Tuesday nights.
Yeah, yeah.
So and there's a really nice AMC and a really shitty AMC that was nice when we were in high school. They're both on my way home. So depending on when show times and stuff line up,
Mm.
that's how I've been doing my movie nights.
Is that the
Um,
one in Kennesaw that you're talking about?
yeah, AMC Barrett, like it's a shithole now, and that's like I've seen so many movies at that theater, and it's so upsetting because it like that used to be the place. There was the first one in town that had IMAX, or at least the first one that was like within reasonable driving distance to me.
Brandon, do you remember the horrible movie theater in Statesboro?
Oh yeah, and it
It called
was
Carmike
it
Cinema?
was a Carmike. It's an AMC now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I grew up in Statesboro, so I mean,
I
for
think it
years
is.
and
The one in
years,
Dublin changed to AMC, and maybe I'm
that
getting confused.
that movie theater was always gross.
Yeah, and
Always.
it's like it sounds terrible, and you can hear the movie next to you in your
Yeah,
theater.
yeah.
Good
No,
times.
I actually have recliners now in my movie theaters, most of them. So I'll take it. I will take
Absolutely.
it.
Um, what have I took the last couple of weeks to catch up on my Marvel. I had not seen the Eternals, or I know the Eternals just came out a week ago. I had not seen Shang-Chi, which we just watched on Disney Plus, and then the other day I saw the Eternals,
Mm.
which I enjoyed. Some weird short, but I how do I want to say? I am glad Marvel let them do something that was very different. Like, and in
Mm.
fact, like I think when we were talking about Dune, Katie and I, we mentioned something like we wouldn't describe Marvel movies as like Shakespearean, and it's probably the closest to a Shakespearean thing that you like. Just the way that it's tied in really thickly with history, but old friends that stab each other in the back and that kind of thing. Like it's very, it's just it's was not like other superhero movies, which I appreciated and I want them to do more of. I would like them to hit better on the execution next time. Um, but and the cast is phenomenal. Like there's so many great actors, and it's like it's a really colorful, diverse cast, and it's um, like I said, I enjoyed it. It had some weird choices, in my opinion, but
Mm.
could have been a lot worse. Shang-Chi, on the other hand, we adored. Um,
Mm.
that was again, I've structurally not that unique for like a superhero movie, but like the fight choreography was really cool, and like the Ten Rings are an amazing superpower, and we are all in for anything that has Aquafina in it, even the stuff that's not so good. Like I don't know, she was in that Ocean's 8 with Sandra Bullock, and that movie sucked. But um,
I love that movie.
what? Oh, okay. To be fair, I am not. I wasn't the biggest fan of the old ones either. And
Okay.
it's I would watch that one before I watched either of the other two sequels. So like
All right.
Ocean's 12 or 13, I would watch Ocean's 8 again before I watched either of those. Um,
Fair enough.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so we're here today to talk about Last Night in Soho, which was one I was very excited about. I'm a big fan of Edgar Wright. Um, but I'll go to you first, Katie. First of all, what's your history with Edgar Wright movies, and then what do you think of this one?
Um, my history with Edgar Wright really goes back to just Baby Driver. I was looking at his filmography and I know he did Scott Pilgrim. I somehow never got into that at all.
Uh,
So
Scott Pilgrim is a really niche kind of thing, but
yeah,
some of his other earlier movies are probably more broad appeal. What do you think of Last Night in
yeah.
Soho?
I really liked Last Night in Soho, but I didn't know what to expect going in. So I was kind of caught off guard, but I liked that. I like going in blind as much as possible. But I will also say that this movie shook me in a way that emotionally affected me in a way I wasn't expecting, which is good. But I don't know if that's the best thing for
Right.
people going to this movie in
I mean,
particular.
and we talked with the last duel. You mentioned like there were some triggering things in it
Mm,
for women or is abuse victims the correct way to say that? I don't want to
yeah, that
sound
sounds
bad about it, but
good.
yeah, yeah. Um, so and there's a little bit of that here too. What about you, Dan? How do you like Edgar Wright movies? And then what did you think of general thoughts about Last Night in Soho?
So I have to confess that I have not seen. I think the only Edgar Wright film I've seen was Hot Fuzz, and it was like when it came out. So that was like a
Mm-hmm.
long time
That's
ago.
high school. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. I think I was like, a scene. I think it was like the last semester of high school.
I
So
don't know. You were a year ahead of me, right?
yeah, I graduated in '07, so
Yeah.
we had like the Bond t-shirts for our graduation
Excellent.
class. It's very odd. But yeah, so I've followed sort of peripherally the films that have come out kind of since then. So I kind of know, I feel like I have a sense that he's doing like, like the Coen brothers, like Scorsese. It's a very like cinephile kind of cinema where he's just pulling lots of different genres, other films kind of together and sort of remixing them and so on and so forth. And so that was kind of like my expectations. And so I went in, and the thing that I kind of was drawn to, because my research in film is mostly like adaptation and remakes and like, homage and some of that stuff. And I just kept thinking about the Bond films that are being referenced, Thunderball very prominently.
Yeah, that's the giant theater marquee that says Thunderball.
Right, and then Diana Rigg, which obviously, he's casting for her association.
And her last role, unfortunately, but one it's good to remember.
It's a really, like we'll get into the film, but like, I would say it's, if you're looking for a recommendation, a little like pull quote, worth seeing for Diana Rigg alone, I would say. She's just one of the, the high points of the movie. But the other like real, this really like most of the time I was watching this, I just kept thinking this is like a stealth remake of like an unacknowledged remake of Roman Polanski's Repulsion, which is also set in like.
Have I seen that? What?
It's on Criterion, so it's floating around there. But I don't know. I don't really know what its reputation is right now. But there's a lot of like, it's not like one for one or anything. But like I would be really surprised if like the next time Edgar Wright goes to like the Criterion closet and those little videos that they do, he's not like pulling out Repulsion, because it's just the vibe is just very similar,
I like it. Okay, so yeah, I would say a better than average Edgar Wright fan. The only movie he's done that I really don't like is The World's End, because it's like everything bad about Shaun of the Dead amplified, and also like none of the characters are likable. But the kind of the through line with his movies, because they're like, honestly, as probably from a genre point of view, they're most of them are very different from each other. But there's always a lot of style. He makes very clear stylistic choices, and they're often very different. But they're often very different movie to movie, other than like music is always important in some way. And especially like, and certainly in Last Night in Soho, like the 60s kind of bar scene, that music is always there, and it's diegetic, which I really like. It's music that the characters can hear. But yeah, I got into Edgar Wright probably in high school. As one, we were at my buddy's house probably one weekend, and we got sick of playing Halo at 3 a.m. So he put on Hot Fuzz, and we were all like, "This is great." And that was Shaun of the Dead came out before that. I went back and watched that one, and then we all went to see Scott Pilgrim together. And I haven't. That's based on a comic book, which was aware of, but have still not read. 12 years later. And I want to compare him to like a Wes Anderson in that his movies are like just a little quirky, and not in the same way or the same degree as Wes Anderson, but like they're very unique to him. And I would say Last Night in Soho turns that on its head almost, because it's nothing like any of the others. And that was, I was on that note, I was really excited about it because, I watched the trailer, honestly not knowing what to expect, and that it's not, most of them are like kind of comedies. I would say that Baby Driver is probably the most, or the least intentionally comedic movie that he's done up to that point. And I love Baby Driver. And there's another one where the music it's first of all, it's diegetic. The main character he suffers from hearing loss, so he always has his headphones in. And so like the soundtrack of the movie is the soundtrack of his life, basically. So the music is obviously really important. And yeah, he's the Last Night in Soho is a love letter to the '60s in a lot of really interesting ways that I thought were very cool, and in very different ways than like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood came out a couple of years ago, and I would say that was also a love letter to this era, but emphasizing completely different things about it. So it's a thumbs up. I like it. Yes. Um, so and we'll get into some specifics, but overall, I really like this movie. I've liked Thomasin McKenzie in a couple of things. Anya Taylor Joy, I don't know that I've ever disliked her, even in movies I wasn't a big fan of. Like, she didn't do much in like Glass, but I thought she was really good in Splice, or not Split, the the um the Shyamalan movie where James McAvoy plays like the schizophrenic. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, she was really good in that, and she's really good in The Witch, um,
Yes.
which
That
is
was the
a
first time I saw her. I think that was her first film, right?
far as I know, yeah, and it's
Yeah. I remember
Robert
seeing
Eggers
it
is a
here.
kind of
Mhm.
an interesting thing, but I've loved both of his movies too so far, and there's another one coming out next year, so that'll be cool. But the one thing I definitely want to touch on is the visual flair of Last Night in Soho. The brief synopsis of the plot here is Thomasin McKenzie's character, Eloise, wants to be a fashion designer. Um, the beginning of the movie, she's invited to attend a fashion design school in London. She's kind of a country girl, lives out in the middle of nowhere with her grandmother, and it's accepted to a school in the big city. Um, and then it's at first an interesting experience, because she's very different than all of the other college folk who stay up all night, and they enjoy the alcohol, and as college students tend to do. Um, so she moves out of student housing and moves in with this little old lady, played by Diana Rigg. Um, and then she realizes when she goes to bed, she dreams that she is a woman from the '60s who wants to be a singer, named Alexandra. What's her Sandy? Sandy is
Andy.
her nickname. Yeah. Um, and she walks around in 1960s England, and some stuff starts to get a little weird. But that's the kind of the premise. Um,
I
and
like that
it's
you had mentioned
Yeah,
that
please.
it's got kind of a similar uh nostalgic quality about it, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So I added that to my description of this movie, which I was thinking about when I watched it, because, like I said, I had no idea what I was really getting into. And so I was thinking, this feels like Mean Girls meets Midnight in Paris meets The Exorcist meets Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That's the only way I really know
That
how to like
that is
describe watching this movie.
that's a very unique sandwich, and you cram them all together between two slices of bread, and it makes for it's an interesting movie, and but what would you compare it to, Dan?
I loved the Once Upon a Time comparison, just because it's interesting, like these two films coming out and within a couple of years of each other, where the subject of the film is like mythologizing and demythologizing the '60s. So
Oh
that's
yeah.
probably the most immediate kind of
um,
reference. I mean,
and
maybe
uh, Edgar Wright and Tarantino obviously do that in very different ways, narratively and stylistically. But yeah, there's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was like right in the front of my head when I was watching this.
yeah, right. Well, it's interesting because I'm thinking, back to like Oliver Stone, for example, just kind of a random name to throw out here, but he's in the news again for his JFK, documentary. So I've been kind of watching like I watched The Doors, so Abby here can get her classic rock dose, And it's
Excellent.
interesting because we're entering this period of time now where you have like directors like Tarantino and like Edgar Wright, the Coen brothers with Inside Llewyn Davis. It's obviously not Hollywood per se, but it's New York, like the indie like music scene in the '60s. And it's interesting to see like how these directors are in effect like making movies about periods where they like were either not alive or were like really little kids. And so what you're getting is not, it's an interesting mix of like handed down sort of like, knowledge of the period, and also just like the movies of the period kind of become sort of the thing upon which the film kind of draws the most inspiration from in both cases. So again, just going back to what I said at the beginning, I mean, I just could not stop thinking about like Repulsion seemed like an obvious sort of source. The Bond films, like even just honestly, I mean, the use of color felt very like 60s. Like you just don't see movies.
And that's a specific beat I'll let you finish, but there's a specific beat I want to mention about the color.
Yeah, right. Well, I just feel like a lot of the times, when I'm watching something, from the last 10 years, last 20 years, I don't know if it's like just, I don't know if it feels like almost we're like still sort of stuck in like the early 2000s, sort of like what TVs could kind of do then is sort of still like informing like the color palette, which tends to be in a lot of movies pretty like bland and kind of, sort of nondescript or just outright, drab in some cases. And just like a lot of like, really sort of simple sort of medium shots and like stuff that like played well in those old CRTVs from like 2001, 2002.
That's fair.
And so it felt like kind of a real throwback to sort of see a film where like so many of the shots, I felt like just like the point of the shot was like, this is a really like vibrant, colorful.
I loved all the stuff inside the nightclub. So it's like when Sandy is walking down the stairs and you have like the series of mirrors and you see like 20 copies of Ellie. That was stuff like, and the like I almost want to say the color is even more vibrant when you would walk inside these places than it was out on the street. Like it's really like
I mean, the first time I was really cluing into the use of color was, I mean, they introduced it in such a subtle but effective way because, there's a French restaurant on the corner.
I know what you're going to say. It's when she's awake versus when she's asleep.
No.
All right, go on. That's what I was going to mention. Yeah,
but the first time she goes to sleep, and it clues you in onto the entire plot of the movie after you watch it, is that, I mean, spoiler alert. All right, I'm going to probably spoil a little bit, but
yeah, go ahead.
That French restaurant, the colors are white, blue, and red, right? And so that red light is totally shining all on Ellie going to bed for the first time in this room, which we later find out was where Sandy was prostituted. So
and the neon light was what I was going to talk about, because when she is awake, that neon light flashes red, white, and blue. When she's asleep, it's always red.
I did not notice that.
Yeah, it cycles when she's lucid, the color cycles, and when she's asleep, before anything else happens, any other kind of weirdness, it tells you very specifically she is asleep right now because it still blinks, but it's always red. And that was the moment I was going to mention when Dan was talking.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, when that first shot of her, that first night she goes to sleep, I mean, there's just this great like silhouetted shot of her sitting, I think, on the bed. And the fact that it just kind of like lingered on that red, like I knew exactly where it was going and what it was kind of, saying with light. And I thought it was just so effective. I was just enthralled by it. It's like right when, I was drawn into the movie was that shot with the red light coming in. I was like, all right, as a woman, I know where this is going.
Something not good happened here.
Yeah.
And before we have any idea what that is, he lets us know. It's like, even that subtle change that, I guess it sounds like you didn't pick up on it at first. Before we know anything about what actually happened to Sandy, we know that something is not quite right about it. And it's a subtle thing, and it's a really important stylistic choice. But and it'll like if you ever get to watch the movie again, pay really close attention. Like it's the I mean, it's really that the neon light gives you a lot, like just the lighting around the street, the light shining into her bedroom, which is I don't know why she didn't put up a blackout curtain or something, but it's it there's a lot of information here that is not coming out of characters' mouths, and that is something that I always really appreciate.
Yeah, I'll jump in here because I'm was struck by because now we're at this place, historically speaking, where like, the movie industry and all the various hangers on are like, what do we do? What are we doing? Streaming? Are we doing like theatrical only? Are we doing like what Warner Brothers is doing, where it's like both? And what's interesting about that is I'm wondering if there are going to be, sometime in the next like 5 years, sort of this differentiation that starts happening. Because I feel like right now it's really, really like hard to tell the difference between like a TV show and a movie. And, like we're at the point where we're even like, why are we even still having that conversation even, So, but what was striking about this film was it felt like there was a lot of that stuff that you're talking about, Brandon, with like the colors and how it's signaling, plot information. I have a hard time imagining that playing well if you're like watching this on streaming and you're like only half watching it. Like,
that is you mentioned active watching earlier too, and that is something that even like I watched Dune on HBO Max, and I have not yet been able to go see it in theaters because other stuff is coming, and Katie's judging me for it. And it was, I did it after my wife went to bed, and I was trying to do my best to pay attention, but it's like it's so easy to get distracted when you're sitting on your couch. And I love that's my favorite movie this year. Like I'm not saying anything bad about Dune. I'm saying I'm making fun of my own bad viewing habits. So it's a very different thing, and some creators are getting wise to it and making content that's better suited to be viewed at home. And you still have, like cinema is cinema, and I really wanted to stick around and kind of, not to say that I don't want it to change, but I want it to mean something, and I want movies to be made for the big screen, and that's how I want to experience them.
Yeah, just real quick, I love that distinction, content versus cinema, because I feel like that's sort of where a lot of these bigger companies and some of these franchise, the big franchises that are seemingly taking over, the movie industry. It just feels like that's kind of where they're trending, and I'm happy that there are some filmmakers and companies who are sort of like no, we're gonna like design this as the cinema experience, and you'll still be able to watch it later if you want to, but like we're expecting active viewing. We're gonna do visual kind of like storytelling as opposed to just dialogue. And yeah, I mean, whether or not you need the physical spaces to like have that, like I don't know, maybe one day we'll get rid of them. I hope not, but that's a really useful distinction, like cinema versus content, I think. And this film definitely falls on like the more very self-consciously so is like cinematic cinema.
As a communications and film scholar, I literally have a paper idea formulating in my head on content versus cinema. But I also I think this is the greatest time of the year for me. I call like the season when everything comes out into theaters my actual Christmas,
And it's great because it lasts for like 3 months.
I know. But I think, I don't know, I'm just struck by how good a lot of the films coming out right now are. And I hate the adage of that coming up every year at the Oscars. We had so many good films this year. Like, all right.
We know. But
this year, actually, I am really struck by the cinema that is coming out, and not just.
And a lot of these movies were made during a global pandemic. Like I think Last Night in Soho was shot before that, but it was like,
yeah, I'm just wondering if that has anything to do with it too. Like Belfast, written, shot, edited during the pandemic. So I'm wondering, you know, I want to keep on that some more. So, I know Last Night in Soho is kind of overlapping that pandemic timeline a bit, but I don't know, a lot happens in that editing process, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the restraints of the pandemic on that industry made filmmakers rely more on traditional cinematic filmmaking, showing over telling. Because I think that's the difference in this content versus cinema discussion that's popped up with this movie. Is that the telling is in the content, but the showing is in the cinema. So if people are, stretched for resources and people to shoot with, then you have to rely on showing. So I'm
And
interested to see how
there's
that's
so much in this movie that is, and I would say probably more than Edgar Wright has done before, in my opinion. There's just a lot of information conveyed visually. Like I don't want to say to its detriment, because at first I think it's effective, but like the faceless gentleman at the when that first happened, I was through, like my jaw dropped. I was like, because I knew that it's so clear what he's trying to say there. Like, unfortunately, I think it's a device that's used a little too much. But when it's, we touched on, she's kind of dreaming that she's this Sandy person who wants to be a singer, and then Sandy gets an audition, and then turns out that it's a gentleman's club, and then she gets coerced into prostitution, which is fucking awful. But it's a result of that is, all the men start to blend together, and it's, at first, I think, a really effective device, and they didn't have to tell me that's what it was. It's just, they're almost like ghosts, but they're not ghosts. You know what I mean? She's Eloise certainly is hallucinating because she doesn't want to go to sleep. After a certain point in the movie, she's realized kind of what's happening to her, and she doesn't want to go to bed, and she's trying to find other ways to do that. But if you've ever seen a Freddy Krueger movie, you know that if you try to stay awake, it only works for so long, and then it starts to happen anyway.
Really hitting home for me as a new dad. I've been living this try to stay awake lifestyle, and you're right, you do eventually fall asleep. So that's really resonating with me. Yeah, I will say that, like, and I hate to say this because it's just like it's the thing I always think about when I'm watching movies, and I don't ever think it's a smart point, but I can never not think it. But I feel like this is a 90-minute movie that was stretched to 2 hours, and I feel like a lot of
I don't disagree with that. Like after singing the praises of the Faceless Men, I think it's overused. It goes on a little too long. And there are some beats that like almost just don't make sense. She's trying to do research about missing persons because she thinks that maybe Jack, who's played by Matt Smith, she thinks he may have murdered Sandy. So she's doing research on missing persons in the library, but she's dozing in and out, and then she's tries to escape the Faceless Men who are kind of bleeding into her consciousness, and then pulls a knife on a classmate, and it's kind of a thing that doesn't really get resolved. Like, okay, so Katie, you're in the library late at night trying to finish a term paper, and then someone is screaming down the hallway and pulls a knife on you. How do you react to that?
I am playing dead.
Yeah, I mean, and she's in the movie. She's like security. She runs up, but it's at the end of the movie, everything's okay.
Yeah,
and it's
it was kind of
a weird choice there. For it's, and I bring it up. I bring it up as something that I think probably could have been lost, and it wouldn't have cost us very much to tighten the movie up a bit, kind of like Dan was saying.
Yeah, for sure. And I also just there was a little too many twists and turns at the end, I think. I was like, all right, so now we got to deal with this. Now she's in a relationship. Now there's a thing here. Now there's this. Now there's this person is this person, And so it just kind of like I needed those twists to be integrated into act one for sure. The foreshadowing to come in. And then more of those B plot elements to develop in act two.
I'm glad you brought up the boyfriend. The performance is fine. He's a perfectly charming guy, but she's in her mind experiencing all of this like sexual abuse, and it's kind of like it didn't seem like she should be in a headspace to be forming a relationship with another person at that. That's one thing that didn't quite work for me, I think.
I see how. I definitely see how, but on the other hand, he acts as a segue into reality, right? So that's what he's there for.
And that's fair. And she kind of uses him as a device to maintain consciousness. It's like, no, the last thing I want to do is go home and go to sleep.
Yeah. I will say though that I don't think any of the movie would work if Eloise's state of mind wasn't so ambiguous, because there's a question of, is she psychic? Is she seeing ghosts? Is she schizophrenic? And
that's a fair point too. We have not mentioned that she sees her late mother in the mirror, and it's something that her grandmother is aware of. But it's not. It's never explained really.
Right, and then even at the police station, they ask, "Is there a history of mental illness in your family?" And she avoids the question because there's unresolved backstory with her own mother's suicide. So I spent the entire movie wondering if Ellie was going to commit suicide and not knowing if it was like a possession kind of thing or a mediumship kind of thing or a mental illness thing or an abuse situation. I think they were all intertwined, and the ambiguity of those circumstances for Ellie are what make this film work. Wondering how this whole plot is coming together cannot be explained in any of those ways, because either way you look at it, it's happening in Ellie's head, but it's also reality. So I don't think the movie would work if we were told specific things about Ellie. We're shown different ways that she could be affected, but leaving that totally ambiguous and then adding that back in at the end when she sees her mother and Diana Rigg, was it Anya Taylor-Joy?
It was Anya Taylor. Together. It was Anya Taylor-Joy is turns out ultimately the young version of Diana Rigg's character.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important aspect of this movie that should not be answered. I think it needs to be ambiguous and works to the extent that the audience is also thrown into a world of not knowing what's real and what's not.
Yeah, I liked that point about the ending, especially in relation to the kind of like the twist heavy nature of the last half, because that was also where I kind of started getting a little like I don't know how specific I can be, but just like the one that was like for me, just like, okay, this is weak. I think you may know what I'm talking about already, but like Terrence Stamp is it's not who you think it is, and it's just like, right. Okay, all right. So,
I do always appreciate seeing Terrence Stamp it was fine. There probably could have been less of him because
it felt like they had the same exact response. Like they wanted Terrence Stamp in their movie, and that was good enough,
But also, I do think it was a relevant piece of information for Ellie to discover. It was not for a while. She thinks it's Jack who was the man who ultimately forced Sandy into prostitution, and it turns out to be the cop who like was just trying to look after her, you know. But then there's a lot of, especially early in the movie, there's a lot of really gross men who give her really uncomfortable attention. And even though, or I'm sorry, who give Ellie really uncomfortable attention. And even though it's, you know, it's revealed that Terrence Stamp plays this cop who was kind of set up as a man who might take advantage of Sandy, but turns out he, you know, really he was looking out for her. But then later in life, he becomes like a weird, creepy old man. Yeah, so it's.
I mean, you just can't. No offense to you two gentlemen, but you can't trust a bro, no matter who they are. I mean, really, I don't. I carry I have a little pocket knife on my keychain and a little stabber tool because I can't, you know, go to the movie theater without wondering if even the cop's gonna follow me. So I totally got that point of like making it ambiguous.
I mean, and that is, Katie, that's one of the reasons I because Dan and I had planned this for a couple of weeks, and then I asked you to be here because I was curious how, you know, as a young woman, how does this compare to your own experience? And, you know, if there's anything on that point that you can add to the conversation.
Sure, I'm happy to. Obviously, this movie is very fantastical in the sense that, like, you know, things get really weird. But in terms of like the occurrences with like creepy guys, I was just like, yep, sounds about right. I mean, the cab driver at the beginning of the movie, gross, but also I was like, not surprised. Like, my best friend is a flight attendant, and the things that she has told me that happen to her on a daily basis far surpass anything that has happened to me. But I mean, I had a very creepy experience where a guy got into my cab. I've had a very creepy experience of like being a teenager in New York and some dudes thought I was a prostitute. I can't, you know, I've walking down the street had, you know, all kinds of just, but the stuff in this movie though, it seems like a daily occurrence to me, you know? So I was actually thinking, watching, you know, Anya Taylor-Joy and Thomasin McKenzie's characters, I was like, oh my God, just walk away. I was like, why aren't you just like, you know, I was
just
like,
get out.
these are so normal. And I, you know, I thought the movie was great, and I thought it handled those things well because it is female-centered characters. But I was like, yeah, this was directed by a man, just because it
yeah, and it's written and directed by a man.
I was like, that's not a big deal, you know. I was like, I understand like the setup of like the cab driver being gross, but like, I was like, that's literally an everyday occurrence. Like a female director would not have played that up.
Which is.
Let me jump in here because I threw on to prep for this. I watched like the first half hour of Repulsion again, and you know it's Roman Polanski, so
it's great.
Yeah,
it's Roman Polanski doing this kind of thing where he's like focusing this film on Catherine, the woman's played by Catherine Deneuve, a very young Catherine Deneuve. She is a very shy, sexually repressed character like Thomasin McKenzie in this film. And the whole point of the movie is to like kind of ostensibly make you empathize with her as she finds herself being kind of subjected to the male gaze, these like creepy guys, and then goes crazy. And, you know, it's very, very much like, you can just feel how this is a film where it's like, yeah, you're trying to get some sympathy, but it's also like, it's the lurid spectacle of her being repressed and then crazy.
Yeah.
And this film feels like it wants to be kind of a corrective to that, like sort of similar kind of setup story, but kind of underlining like, no, this is like, we are empathizing very actively with this character.
Yeah.
But it feels like when you start pulling apart some of the cracks, that's where you get some really interesting kind of inconsistencies and contradictions. Like the other one that kind of comes to mind is like, yes, this is a movie about women who are being, you know, sexually abused and sort of coerced into prostitution. But yet you still do kind of have these like male sort of savior figures who are kind of like hovering around the edge, you know, like there's sort of like the parallel to the sort of the scuzzy dudes who are hovering around the edge, and there's just like stuff like that, which is very like, you can kind of see, sort of some of this tension, I think, kind of in these moments.
Yeah. I thought it was also very easy to villainize the character of Sandy. And I thought that they steered away from that just enough at the end, where like her actions were not condoned, but they were also understood. And so I appreciated that. That felt good to me. But these little moments that like you said, Dan, like you want to empathize with these characters. Like those little moments, I was just like, as a woman, I was just like, all right. Like, yes, I empathize, but I was like, what's new? Like, show me why this is actually like an instance that I need to see on screen.
Do you think maybe I don't know, I kind of am wondering if in Edgar Wright's imagination, like consciously or not, if his like target audience is more guys, because it almost feels a little bit like guys, like don't do this.
Yeah.
Don't be creepy.
No, I think that's a very valid question. I hadn't thought of that, but
so it's a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
I
also
it's easy to understand that you just shouldn't creep on people, and you shouldn't abuse them.
You would think it's not that simple. You would think, but also like the Sam Claflin character, I just want to say, like you see the older version.
Sam Claflin, the cop guy, the dude that was in the Hunger Games.
Yeah. Like he's a fantastic actor. He's well sought after. He's very successful. That character, you can say yes or no, maybe a male savior. I don't know. It didn't bother me that much, just in the sense that I was like, why are you wasting Sam Claflin? He was in like 5 seconds of this film. And I was like, I want to see more of that interaction here. Is he the good cop or the bad cop? I want to see more of like that part. Because I feel like there may have been more of that on the cutting room floor that maybe just slowed the movie down at that point, because Sam Claflin is a name you want to bill.
Oh yeah.
So I'm wondering if there was more of the like police plot in Sandy's part of the story that would mirror the plot point of Ellie going to the cops as well. But I was like, why are you wasting Sam Claflin? And that could have been a much more interesting progression for the older version of that character too, to like tie those 2 points together. And I think that would have made a lot more sense in why we have this creepy old guy walking around,
That makes sense. And I do want to add that, like, you mentioned that it would be really easy to villainize Sandy, and like it's at least while I was sitting there watching it, starting about when Terrence Stamp gets hit by the car, through the big climax when we find out that Diana Rigg is Sandy and is ill because of all these terrible things. It's like it takes some interesting steps where it, like, I felt it kind of confused what it was trying to say for a little while. Because it's okay. We find out that it was actually Sandy who murdered dozens of men because they abused her. And then after she has stabbed the boyfriend, she then takes a turn when the house is on fire and then says, go save the boyfriend, or whether it's save the boy and get out. And then at the end, you mentioned it earlier, where she sees she does her fashion show after all this is resolved, and then the very last kind of coda to the movie is she sees her mother and Sandy in the mirror again. And it's okay, until this moment, I kind of felt like we thought Sandy was like a villainous piece, like obviously terrible, unspeakable things happened to her, but she responded in the wrong way or something. But then her and Sandy and Eloise are on good terms at the end, at least based on what I can deign from the brief look that they share. There's no dialogue. So it's how did you guys interpret that series of beats? Because I'm curious if I'm just overreading it or if I missed something. Because it just seems like it seems like it's going one way and then it tries to tell me something else and then it turns again and tries to tell me something else again. And I'm just curious, how did you guys feel about the ending? Finding out that Diana Rigg was not that Sandy was not murdered. She actually killed all these abusive men, and then she dies in the fire, etc. But then her and Eloise seem to be okay after she's tried to murder Eloise. So yeah. So how do you guys interpret the ending? I'm curious. Dan, go first.
Yeah, I'll start because I may have to put baby down in a minute. But I want to first I'll just go back to something Catherine said, just sort of about the ambiguity at the end, which is like not knowing fully whether or not like how much of this is a dream, how much of this is like Twilight Zone kind of like shenanigans.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so especially coming kind of after this sort of sequence where it feels like the film has gotten very like it just feels like it's juggling too many like different sort of goals for a little while near the end. So I like that it was able to kind of like pull back in those final moments and sort of end on kind of a moment of really pronounced ambiguity. Because aside from the fact that you're not really sure what's going on with Eloise, the other unresolved question, which is I think kind of needs to be unresolved, is just sort of like, okay, what do we make of Diana Rigg and sort of like what she's doing? And I think some of this is like, speaks to the smartness of, I don't know if that's a word, but like of casting Diana Rigg, because I feel like just the number of associations that she's accumulated over the course of her career from like the Avengers, James Bond films.
Yeah, she's a Bond girl.
Yeah, all these other things, like you just have all of these like kind of built in, like for many viewers are going to have a built in kind of connection to this character, which is going to play off of like the horrific sort of stuff that she's telling you. And I'm just thinking back to that, like the explanation scene, which is like usually such a cliched kind of moment of like the killer explains the plan, but just that close-up was just very, very there was just a lot of tension in that close-up between like the little old lady kind of vibe that she gives off and the very menacing kind of thing that she does too. So I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking back a little bit to just, this is what genre films do, and Edgar Wright is nothing if not a guy who's really, really into his movie genres. And the most effective genre films tend to be the ones where they kind of raise a question. They sort of bring up an issue. In this case, it's, mental illness, sexual assault, some of these thorny questions. And then they don't really resolve, these questions. They just kind of like leave them sort of lingering. And I liked how this film, very kind of knowingly sort of embraces that quality of genre films where it's not trying to nail it down and be like, she's bad. It's not trying to be like a very simple cautionary kind of morality tale with like a really nice moral. It's sort of being like, all right, here's the crazy old lady, credits. So I like that. That's I think the movie would not work if you didn't kind of have that ambiguity, that double ambiguity at the end with, how are you supposed to feel about these two women? I feel like that's sort of a great thing to kind of leave the audience with.
What do you think, Katie?
I thought it was very interesting to choose to use the young Sandy instead of the Diana Rigg Sandy. And that just, of course, also impacts the ambiguity of the question of Ellie's mind, right? Is she psychic? Is she mentally ill? Is it because of abuse? What, And I just found it interesting that like, her mom is the only one that she sees, in that headspace, right? Whatever that is. And then the choice to use Anya Taylor-Joy for that shot at the end, where she is now one of those people that she sees.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think anybody can interpret it any way. There is certainly a sense of ambiguity about why and how and what's the moral, if there is one, right? But I felt like it was a really subtle way of showing that young Sandy that died you know, that young Sandy whose life was taken away from her by Jack and all of these men, that's the person that was like resolved from that experience, like that person, that young Sandy can now be laid to rest, right? Instead of the older Sandy who was so burdened by her abuses, right? So I thought that was an interesting thing. And just from a standpoint of, we know that Ellie's mom had committed suicide. And so this person is with her and hopefully like unburdened, and I felt like there was some kind of parallel there with using Anya Taylor-Joy's version of the Sandy character there, just as kind of like I don't know if it's like a cautionary tale for Ellie. It certainly is for the audience, but maybe it is in the same sense of being cautionary about her own mother's experience in that lineage. So I thought there was just an interesting parallel there, and perhaps a reason for showing that young Sandy versus Alexandra.
That's an interesting, no, because I wouldn't, that's not a thought I had. Like, it made enough sense to me for it to be young Sandy, I guess. Like, I didn't have the thought that it could have been Diana Rigg at all. And this, maybe it's, maybe she feels a little bit kind of a kindred spirit with Sandy, with young Alexandra, but old Alexandra turned out to be terrifying. Bless you. Yeah, that's but
I just felt like, it seemed to me like Ellie's mom was kind of frozen at a time of her death, at least for Ellie. We don't really know when that happened.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's unclear. Like, it seems recent, but not, right. Maybe just not that recent. It doesn't really say.
So I'm wondering if her mom is like stuck in time in her head, then it would kind of make sense to me that young Sandy would be stuck in time in Ellie's head more than this person that she just figured out was the same person right before she died. She definitely has a very intertwined psyche, relationship, personality, wants, desires with young Sandy. And so I can imagine maybe that's why that's emphasized. It's very easy to say it's Anya Taylor-Joy, right. And bank off of that. But I think there's a multitude of possible ambiguous reasoning behind that choice.
Well, that would tie into the other thing that I really quite liked about this film, which is like that whole like opening kind of hour when she's in the real world, London, and you see how she's like modeling her hair after, she dyes her hair blonde, she starts kind of really going all in on like the 60s aesthetic, which she was already, kind of all into. Like, I think the first or second shot of the film, you like are literally seeing her apartment, and it's just like heard in.
I hate to derail you there, but I loved the intro where it's like it starts as a little box where you just see Ellie's silhouette, and she starts to dance, and the lights come up, and it shows all of her 60s memorabilia, and she's wearing a dress that she designed, and it was just a very, very interesting way to kind of set up that, before any of this happens, it's already in her head that she likes this kind of style. And I'm sorry to interrupt there, but you mentioned the opening, and that was one thing that really stuck out to me as I was sitting there.
That's also, I'll add too, that is one of two moments in the film which is more or less directly referencing Repulsion. That's why I'm so stuck on that. Yeah, because that film takes place mostly in a small apartment, and there's a lot of shots where, it's a widescreen shot, but it's framed, where there's like a door as the center of the shot, and it makes the widescrreen look very claustrophobic. So there's a lot of that in Repulsion, but like the psychological kind of thing that was kind of being made, I think, with those moments is, it goes back to that mystification, demystification of the 60s thing. I mean, this is a kind of on one level a movie about like, fetishizing the past. You have a character and you have a filmmaker who are really kind of getting into just like wearing the clothes, like kind of mimicking the style, sort of playing the music. And it's interesting to kind of see how the narrative actively kind of questions, like, okay, yeah, maybe this nostalgia kind of memory isn't really what's going on.
That's exactly why this film reminded me of Midnight in Paris. Two very different vibes, but for those reasons alone, the questioning of the era and the
Midnight in
time.
Paris with Owen Wilson, the Woody Allen movie.
Yeah.
That came to mind for me too. Just I kept thinking about that scene at the end of Midnight in Paris where they like go back to the 20s and they're like, the 1890s, man. But yeah, I mean, it's a similar thing, and Tarantino is doing a similar thing too. I feel like this one is more overtly demystifying, whereas I don't know, Tarantino, I think he thinks he's demystifying, but actually is very much remystifying.
Right. He's Tarantino-izing everything. We're coming up. We just rolled over an hour. Anything else we haven't touched on? Any closing thoughts?
I was just really struck by how interesting adding the horror element was. I wasn't expecting it from a quasi period piece.
Right.
And I really felt like it was going to be, I was prepared for a psychological thriller, right? I was getting that. I was kind of pushed into that from Baby Driver a little bit. And I thought that that's where it was going to go, which is, I think, why I was wondering if Ellie was going to commit suicide. But to have that horror element thrown in, like, I thought it was more effective than like traditional horror, like The Conjuring, which I love, which Brandon, you and I have talked about.
Oh yeah.
I was just struck by how well it fit in and how it was introduced in such an overt way and how it worked. I was just surprised. I was just, I don't know if everybody would think it would work or not, but if you can go with it, I think it does.
I agree. What about you, Dan? Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with pretty much everything that y'all have said. If I'm really being nitpicky, yeah, I could zone in on some of that stuff in the back half that we're all kind of in agreement is seems like everybody, just the critics, just everyone I've read reviews by seems to think that the second half just isn't as strong as the first. But
it's not as focused. Like it, yeah. You say that there's a 95-minute movie in here somewhere, and I think most of that trimming can happen in the second half of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you zoom out, and you sort of just like look what it's doing kind of on a macro kind of level with just like, the cinema references, sort of examining and, critiquing that like fascination with earlier eras, doing that kind of in content style, just, the craft, the stuff we've talked about with like just the colors and the way that this is really like, you could watch this on TV, but like you're gonna have more fun if you can get it in a cinema. So
I agree.
Yeah,
keep releasing your movies in cinemas.
Yeah, please. Right. Exactly. So I'm in favor of this just as a a good throwback, to like an older kind of form of cinema, a good kind of like a good counterpiece, honestly, like to a lot like it's a mainstream film, it's like not something that you have to really like dig and hunt to find, but it's like a really good counterpoint to what feels like is now just a market that's like 2.5 hour like epics, which some of them may be good, some of them may be bad, but I hope that there's still space for like those like little like $20-30 million kind of like sort of weird kind of offbeat movies that are still kind of in the mainstream sort of space. That's so that's where this one really kind of hit for me. So,
and I think it does that very well. I think it knows where it lives and it delivers for that audience and that budget and the expectations. I will add though that we touched on it at the beginning that it's a little triggering, which it definitely is, and I think that's an important disclaimer when talking about this film. It's certainly like a anxiety driven piece for anybody, but especially anybody that's a woman or been in that kind of situation before. So
And that's
I
something that, you know, I knew it was a horror slash thriller is kind of how it was marketed, but the trailers don't really fill you in as to what those elements are, other than there's something weird about what's going on in the city. You know, there's something weird going on, is what all the trailers said. You know, and
yeah,
that's why, um, you know,
I
it was
definitely
a
left.
surprise to me, and I think it, you know, it's a welcome film. There's a lot of really interesting commentary on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I definitely left this movie being emotionally affected. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think movies should do that.
Absolutely
But
not.
I was definitely thrown for anxiety loop on this one. I have a lot of anxiety as a person anyway. And I don't know if you're that kind of person, I'd recommend watching it at home, even though it's
In a where
absolutely
you're in
stunning.
somewhere, you're in a safe place, and there, you know, there, yeah.
Yeah, even though it's stunning on, on the big screen. But if you're a film person and you like movies and you take the care of like making sure that you can watch movies at home well, go for it. Go for it. Just from the sense of like, yeah, it's a doozy.
Just add here that it's really fascinating that we're kind of like describing a movie that is simultaneously we're like describing as like really fun, really colorful, really inventive, but also really like triggering, really anxiety inducing.
And it's all of these things, and that's wonderful. You know, so there, you know, we've talked about some things maybe it doesn't succeed on, but just the fact that so many of these elements come together and work as well as they do is a credit to Edgar Wright and all of the cast in this movie, which is like
Yeah.
phenomenal. It was like I was I was
And I
really
just
taken with
wish I
Last Night in
had
Soho.
more
I really
Sam
enjoyed it.
Claflin.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I just wish I had more Sam Claflin. That's the only thing that I would want to change, besides, the pacing towards the end. But my one actual change, I would want to see more Sam Claflin.
Thanks a lot for coming to chat, guys. I always appreciate having you on, and I hope to do more with more than one panelist here or there. You know, it's scheduling's already a thing, and we only got to do this because I didn't get to go to work today because I don't have a car. So I appreciate you guys being available, and your thoughts are always welcome. And if, like I said earlier, anyone who has enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It's down below me somewhere. And have a good time at the movie theaters. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.